Hey associates, this lecture is about project management strategies and genres for technical, professional, business, and personal productivity contexts. I'm going to talk about the documents that can capture, document, and provide direction. 3 verbs that are essential for staying productive and accountable in project and collaborative environments. You can use our note-taking guide to help you organize your thoughts and all those big actions, the what will I do because of this information. I will give you a few sound cues to help you stay organized in your notes too. This sound means a segment or major topic. Think a heading, and a short ding is a key point you should write down. After each section, you will hear this sound, which means stop and check your notes because it's a recap. I will also give you a where I recommend stopping and returning another time to stay fresh and focused. Don't listen in one go. You will start zoning out, so break it up. You have all week. The first section gets into the why of documenting the actions and situations in a project. The second section dives into the most common genres across workplaces with practices for effective writing. And the final section covers more roles and niche specific genres to be aware of and their uses. Let's get started. Section 1, the what and why for projects. To begin, let's consider the life cycle of a project at large. There are a lot of ways to manage the development cycle of projects, which we'll go over in our lab activities, but basically a project never just goes straight from an idea to existing. We have to take steps and stages, and the more thought and seriousness you put into your project cycle, usually the more efficient and high quality your output will be. We do start with an idea, then we work through 4 stages of project management. The first is the pre-project planning stage. Before investing too much time developing an idea that might not be needed, we have to do some pre-planning. We do that to define the problem, identifying the needs, goals, objectives, and constraints. We research the context. We identify potential variations and alternatives, and we need to consult with our stakeholders. In a class project, for example, this pre-planning stage might look like reviewing the assignment sheet and brainstorming some options you can work with. You would also do light research to make sure all of your topic options have enough substance or quality to them for the assignment. And then you can meet with your professor as a stakeholder to answer any questions and confirm your topic will work. That stage saves you a lot of trouble than if you just dive into the first idea that you have. Remember, you can only make the best choice if you give yourself viable options. Once the idea's viability is considered, we get into the project development stage. Basically, now that you know your idea holds up, you can start working towards it by writing the plan, the timeline, the budget, the tools, developing or designing the detailed concepts, submitting or responding to RFPs with formal proposals. In our classroom example, this development stage is when we create our sketches, outlines, and really organize the project. Here you also set your personal due dates and milestones to get it done. Now, since you created a clear plan in the development stage, you can get into the project implementation next. Here's where you actually do the work. So you might write contracts and apply for permits in your construction and building sites. You're going to report on your progress all along the way, and you need to document and record those project elements to reference later. You also continue your research and design improvements. Here, in that class situation, is where drafting, checking in with your professor, working with your study groups, and using all of the resources you have to finish the project come into play. And finally, the project completion stage. Being finished doesn't actually mean the project is done. We still need to provide the final reports and documentation, such as completion reports or retrospectives. We have to close contracts and pay the people, and build out any ongoing support. It could be user guides for your stuff, FAQs, assessment plans, maintenance schedules, and any other follow-ups. Here's where you wait for your grade in a classroom and possibly make revisions or resubmissions if your professor allows it. You definitely review the feedback and think of how to incorporate it into future projects, and just generally assess how it all went and where you can improve. Reasons for documenting along the cycle. One of the main reasons why we write things down is to create a paper trail in a very logistics and personal accountability focused way throughout the project lifecycle. And so for better or worse, there definitely is an idea, especially in American and Western workplaces, that the person who's really good at documenting, expressing, and sharing what is happening can get an edge of authority. something in writing is typically viewed as more valuable and official than just verbal accounts or agreements of things. And side note action, this is why you should always get position negotiations and conditions in writing. While technically a verbal contract, it's still a contract in the legal sense, having it in writing and signed is a stronger situation to put yourself in. So if you get a job offer and they promise moving expenses, or at your current job you ask for and get a new stipend for the internet bill in your home office, always get that in writing before moving forward. Also, documenting what you plan to do, what did get done, how it got done, and any incidences that occurred shows more accountability. No matter what kind of workplace you end up in, if it's more in the business administrative side, if it's more of like a technical field side, the medical side, an engineering side, honestly, whatever kind of job it is, your ability to capture what is happening around you, explain it clearly to somebody so they know the actions you've taken, and be able to recommend actions moving forward definitely can give you some ethos, credibility, and authority, and be a strong way to show your value and contributions in the big picture. So the thing to remember, and really why we're going to talk about all of these genres, is because we want to document what's up and drive action forward. Here are some scenarios that happen in project management where we need to document. There are 4 kinds of kind of basically likely scenarios that I guess you'll probably encounter across any kind of job or workplace or industry you end up. At least these are the things that me and my friends across various technical and creative industries experience. So the first one is if you need to summarize a situation. So maybe you traveled for the project and then you need to submit something like a trip report that explains all of your expenses and the outcomes of that trip. It will be super short, and often companies have a template or even online submission portal for you to document and summarize your activities, explain how they relate to the project or the work, and upload your receipts. Or if something happens, like your lab equipment maybe breaks down, you need to document what happened, how it impacts your workflow, when it needs to be fixed, and if certain parts need to be ordered. All of that is really just summarizing a situation. So that way you can hand it off to the powers that be and get the resolution that you need. The next thing that you might use these documents for is sharing progress status. And if you have a lot of long-term projects, anything a few weeks or more, you definitely need to keep tabs on the work and update people. Your clients, supervisors, parallel teams, all these different people on a project, they need to know that you're still on track. So that way, everybody knows that you're spending their money accordingly, you're spending your time accordingly, and there's actual results happening. The deliverable is going to come the way they expect. We more commonly use the informal versions to just send over, to your team as a quick check-in. We have mid-formal versions for maybe the project manager or product manager, possibly your supervisor. Those ones also might go in a file and come up again during your performance reviews. And then we have formal versions that might go to your investors or the actual clients if you are contracted to do something external. So summarizing situations and sharing a progress status are the 2, I'd say, most common document situations across the general job market. And if you own your own business, you'll probably want to expect those from the people working under you so you know what is going on. Now, the third situation is to request stuff or complain or ask for adjustments on something if it goes wrong. So these are kind of specific, but it's really like if you end up working with budgets in any way, it is going to be more common for you to have to file official reports to request more money for things and document what you spent it on. And you're going to have to explain how much you need, why you needed it, why there's no other alternatives for the stuff you need, where it's going to come from, and why this specific service, product, good is necessary. Sometimes you have to really justify why there aren't especially cheaper options or alternatives that would work. So those are all things you'll put in your document about the project to justify and explain and ultimately request what it is you need for success. We like to have that paper trail, having that clear thing that you can reference back to, even if it's just for yourself. For example, when I launched my freelance LLC, I still documented my why for the company, even though it's literally just me and my spouse, why we needed and chose certain software, new equipment, and other budget items. Creating those documents required me to stop and actually think, research, compare, and justify, again, to myself, which options were best and worth the investment costs. And now we have records, just in case, even though the need for an audit is pretty low for us. You also might need to submit formal letters or documents to manufacturers or service providers that can't just have an online order. And so as you get into that scaled up, super expensive industry level, ordering is different. It's not like going online and just adding stuff to your shopping cart like we get to do as consumers. It's definitely more common to, need to actually reach out to their salespeople, possibly submit a request for bids and quotes, and then generate what we call a purchase order, which is reviewed and approved by your company's purchasing and finance folks. It all gets tracked very carefully, very officially. Then that quote, purchase order, and final delivery receipts, as well as any other materials, are saved in the fiscal year spending records and pulled back up during budget reviews and internal or external audits. My job in college was actually working in a business office, and every summer we had to pull all the records from the past year and reconcile every document to the accounting sheets from all of the department purchases, travel, everything. It was super annoying to track down missing, incomplete, or just terribly documented spending. And then last, if something goes wrong with that order, you might need to submit or at least document what happened. It could be, in the form of a formal complaint letter, basically sending the information back to that service provider, that manufacturer. You would tell them, here's what it was supposed to be, here's what it actually is, here's what's wrong with it, and here are the adjustments, the refund, the replacement parts, the thing that you are asking for in the situation. And you put it all together in that document, again, so you can save it, reference it, and track it all along the process until you get your resolution. So requesting stuff is a little bit more specific to a job title. Some of us will end up depending on it a lot. Others, you probably won't see that situation as often. You might just see a copy of the purchase orders or the receipts if somebody is submitting it on your behalf. And the last situation where we need to document things for a project is that overall direction, vision, KPI, and strategy. When you start a new project, you need to write all those things down so everyone can see it and refer back to the plan for their individual roles. What are we doing? When are we doing it? Why are we doing it? Who are we doing it for? Highly formal versions of this is probably looking at the more high leadership level roles, while informal versions are widely used. I had to do this type of formal project management writing a lot when I was working at the director level. Every decision and initiative I came up with needed to be carefully documented and justified with the outcomes. My formal documents were then often reviewed by the even higher level decision makers for budget approvals and resource management. I also edited them into less formal, more tailored versions for the people working on the initiatives with me. We see these formal directives in the government sectors a bit, especially where they send out memos for new policies that other agencies need to comply with. Folks seeking grants or any special funding on projects usually need these document proposals and formal plans too. If you aren't writing these types of directives and plan documents, you will probably need to read them when they get sent from your leadership team. If you get the opportunity to oversee an intern or something in your workflow someday, or if you're leading even a smaller team and you become the project lead there, you might want to write these on a smaller scale. I would need to write 10 plus page ones for year-long success initiatives, and as a project leader, you might only need 2 pages. Either way, if you have any project team or direction, you need to at least document in some informal ways the action that is happening and how things are going to get done. So overall, we have many reasons why capturing and writing about your situations at work come up. Super often, you won't find these expectations specifically listed in your job descriptions, though. Instead, it is an implied aspect of whatever role you hold. Usually, it's the type of writing and documentation that just goes on in the background to make your main responsibilities happen with that paper trail. Ethics in project management. Now, this segment gets into the specific examples and applications of those ethical principles for project management situations. We talked about ethics broadly in the Introduction to Technical Writing lecture. As a quick recap on those ethical principles, technical writers have an ethical obligation to not mislead readers, so information should be presented in a way that is accurate, complete, and unbiased. We also have 6 big principles, but the 2 most important for today are honesty, with specific expectations to not perform work outside of our job scope during hours compensated by clients or employers, except with their permission, nor do we use their facilities, equipment, or supplies without their approval. When we advertise our services, we do so truthfully, and we think about quality, where we negotiate realistic agreements with clients and employers on schedules, budgets, and deliverables during project planning. Then we strive to fulfill our obligations in a timely, responsible manner. You might need to adjust or update what the deliverables are actually going to be at the end of a project. That isn't uncommon. So you need to send a status update of, hey, we thought it was going to be this, but here's what's actually going to turn out. You have an ethical and professional obligation to provide those realistic agreements that can actually be fulfilled within the project scope. I like to follow a general PR creed of acknowledge the situation, move through the issues, and redirect the focus with news and project changes like that. Provide concrete, but still big picture, details of why the original deliverable isn't going to work anymore. Describe what is changing and how it's changing so the project can move forward. And then redirect everyone to your new solutions, outcomes, and continued responsibility to finish the work. Don't dump every single detail in there and bury the important information behind a wall of text. Because there's also an ethical principle of burying bad news and details in the fine print or the presentation of your information as a problem. Creating new prototypes, renders, diagrams, and other visuals can be helpful when presenting the changes to the deliverable for the client so they can visualize what is being altered and how it can still meet the project goals. So basically, just tell them what's up and make sure you have those key details and changes in a clear, easy to understand form, even if it might be the end of your project because they don't like or want the new deliverable. It's our ethical obligation. The other more common ethical challenge that we run into with project management is when projects fall behind and budgets need to change. So the deliverable is still working fine, it's just delayed or more expensive than you originally planned. The most important thing is that you document, again, what the changes are, why they're happening, and what the new projections are going to be. Make it very clear and direct for whoever is approving those changes so they can make the decisions that they need. Some may say underpromise and overdeliver in bids, quotes, and proposals. I mean, sure, I guess, but I say estimate as accurately as possible. It's easier to create realistic and feasible estimates for schedules and budgets if you've carefully and accurately documented and saved all that work from past projects. Then you can pull up those materials for similar contexts and use them as tools and reference points for your new expectations. Quick story. So this situation happened to me when I was working on a freelance contract to do some technical writing for an organization. And I was actually teamed up with another freelance contractor. We were supposed to work on this project together, and that person had to drop out for personal reasons. Life happens. The project manager and I sat down and created a new timeline for the deliverables. My new timeline was based on knowledge of myself, how fast I've been able to turn out similar video, research, and presentation materials in the past, and my schedule. I was able to say, here's how much more time I need to make up for the work now. And then I also requested a change in the budget. Hey, since I'm now doing more of the work, can I revisit the pay for this contract? Both of those changes, the new deadlines and the increased pay, were documented and signed. And then, just as the project continued, I sent updates. I'm still on track, I'm still on schedule, and I did finish right on the timeline I had estimated. It really wasn't that big of a deal all around, but it would have been a big deal if my teammate had just ghosted us instead of sending that initial change. Suddenly we would have been like, what are we doing? What am I supposed to be doing? Why aren't things getting done? What's going on? So overall, I found that most people, most shareholders, stakeholders, teammates aren't that upset when plans change because we've all been through it. If you've ever had to manage any kind of project or plan, any kind of event, or just generally work with big groups of people, we know that things happen, right? And we also have lives outside of our specific jobs. So I found that most people don't tend to be that upset that the plan is changing as long as they are told about it right away, clearly and completely. Going to them with the new solution or timeline and answers to their potential questions ready really helps. The problems tend to creep up when you withhold or just avoid writing that document, sending that email, explaining it in that meeting. So as soon as you figure out that things are changing, you document it, you send the status update, you offer some solutions, and you give them a clear path forward, and things are usually all right to, an extent, of course. And if you lose the contract, document all that too to help improve your planning and estimates in the future. It's our first recap. You should have content and examples for the following points that relate to your life, interests, career goals, and brains. You might also have some doodle stories or scenarios to help you remember and process why documentation is important in project management. There are 4 main scenarios in a project that require clear, descriptive documentation: summarizing the situation, sharing the progress status, requesting resources, and directing actions. You also need the basics of ethics with project management at the core. Have notes for what acknowledge, move, and redirect means as a strategy when things need to change. How do we acknowledge the key deadlines, the details of what happened? Don't hide it or avoid it. How are you going to explain the path forward with a clear plan and logic? And what do we do to redirect attention to the new deliverables, outcomes, and schedules? Have examples of how documenting all the things that happen in a project can help you better manage the next project too. That completes section 1 of this lecture. Please take a long break to let your mind refocus. Try to take at least an hour off or even come back another day. When you're ready, continue on to section 2, which will be about the genres of project management. Section 2. In this section, we'll talk about the general qualities for project management documents and then some specific genres you may encounter. You will probably write these documents and be even more likely read these documents in various careers. I'm starting by discussing the idea of a genre and the project management set of genres. So by genre, I really mean documents that have enough similarities and sort of expectations that they are recognized as a group and serve a specific purpose. And so think about it like a comedy film. Even though we have a lot of variety within the comedy genre, you got your rom-coms, which are a little bit different than, raunchy comedy, which is a little bit different than physical comedy, which is still, a little bit different than like an animated comedy. There's variations for that situation, but we still recognize all of those movies as comedies because they have some high-level similarities and they serve these high-level purposes and reactions. And we can quickly tell that this movie is a comedy and this movie is a horror movie. Again, we have some genre variations of what makes a horror film, but we still recognize this is horror, this is comedy, purpose of horror versus purpose of comedy. So think about the same idea for all of these document types that we'll be talking about today, and really all of our genres this semester. So for project management documents, they are similar in the situations they get used. They're similar in what we expect from them content-wise, even though there are variations to them. So some of those features of project management genres. A couple of the things of these project management genres to look for and hold is the things that make them a comedy and not a horror film. First, typically, we're going to put things like contact information and other situational identifiers on the document, usually up front. And this is something that may or may not appear in other genres and types of writing, but for these types of documents, it's super important. And basically, think of it like your email headers or the business contact information on a letter, an invoice, a proposal, progress reports, right? We need the who, what, and when of the situation for incident reports, meeting agendas, all that stuff. Since they are just about action, we also like to make sure that the reader knows who is doing the documenting and where they can go for help or clarifications. The next steps and other more important information like logistics typically show up in project management docs. The second thing is going to be things like the scope and expectations. So basically, we include what we call the scope of a project, which are the boundaries of the situation. You will have a different, project doc and potentially different variation or sub-documents for your different stakeholders in every unique project. So you're telling the reader, this progress report or this proposal is just about this project A, here are the details, and then you would write a completely different document with a different scope for project B. Or this incident report is just at site 1. Maybe there was a big, accident at the site, and so you would have one for every individual that got hurt, and then a totally separate one for the overall investigation of what happened. So you can track and support each person separately, and then have something for the overall investigation to reference. And then last, in these reports, they're very action and management focused, so we're always going to have some sort of timelines, tasks, next actions. So basically telling people what happens next, what are those upcoming items, what is the schedule. If you do have something like an incident report, often you're going to outline the timeline of both the accident and then the timeline of any investigation, next steps, repairs, all of those outcomes. So those are going to be our kind of big features that again just help us think about these specific genres and documents that we're going to talk about. It's the situation of the details, situation of the scope, situation of the timelines and actions. Proposals. Proposals come in super formal as well as informal varieties as they represent your documented plan for the events. I'm going to focus on the more formal variety because you can always scale it down as you need from here. A proposal, in the technical sense, is a document that tries to persuade the reader to implement a proposed plan or approve a proposed project. Most businesses rely on effective proposal writing to ensure a successful continuation of their business and to get new contracts. So your purpose is to convince the reader that the plan is valuable. It's really worth the time, energy, and expense necessary to implement or see it through, with some tangible benefits. Proposals are often written in response to a request for proposal, RFP, by government agencies, organizations, or other companies. The requesting body receives multiple proposals responding to their request. They review all of those submitted proposals and choose the best one to move forward. Their evaluation of the submitted proposals are often based on a rubric that basically grades the elements of the proposal. So in that way, it's really just building on the skills you practice in every class. When you read an assignment sheet, deliver on what is asked, and get judged for how well you accomplish that task, an RFP is just like a high stakes business version of that. Usually an RFP, and then typically sections for proposals, ask for a few key elements that are good in all good plans. An introduction or background section, a statement of the problem to be solved or opportunity to improve, innovate, your purpose, motivation, goals, and objectives, a definition of the scope and your approach, and a situation analysis, the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental or ethical factors in the market. A technical background section, a project description, a schedule of the work and timeline, a validation plan or quality assurance standards, budget, maybe your qualifications, and a conclusion. There are 4 kinds of proposals, categorized in terms of whether or not they were requested and whether they are meant to solve a problem within your own organization or for someone else. So the first is solicited proposals. An organization identifies a situation it wants to improve or a problem that it wants to solve and issues that RFP asking for proposals on how to address it. Unsolicited proposals are when a writer perceives a problem or opportunity and takes the initiative to propose a way to solve that problem or take advantage of that opportunity. It's not responding to a request, though. This can often be the most difficult kind of proposal to get approved since no one's asking for it. Now, internal proposals, these are written by someone within the same organization. Since both the reader and the writer share the same workplace context, these proposals are generally shorter than external versions and usually address some way to improve your specific work-related situation. Things for productivity, efficiency, profit, etc. And last, external proposals. These are sent outside of your organization, usually to solicit business. Since these are external documents, they are usually sent as highly formal reports if they're long and introduced by a cover letter or a letter of transmittal. An important note, even though proposals are persuasive with a goal to convince the reader that your plan is great and you are qualified to execute on that plan, they are not advertisements or marketing materials. The persuasive appeals really come from a strong sense of logos, right? The logical appeal with objective language, thoroughness, and clarity. You become more persuasive in this context when you have a super detailed, clearly reasonable, fully feasible plan laid out for people to see the value and the likelihood of your success. So, a few considerations in language just to help us get to that strong plan. First, remain solution-oriented and constructive. You are seeking to improve a situation and not just pointing out everything that is wrong. Be clear and coherent. Don't confuse your reader with details or have that sort of illogical organization structure. Just remember, when people feel confused or frustrated, they are less likely to approve what you need, so make it easy. Be concise and courteous. Don't annoy your reader with clutter, unnecessary elements, and design, inappropriate tone, or any hard-to-read formatting. Again, confusion and frustration are not our friends when we're trying to persuade folks. And be concrete and complete. Avoid vague generalities, give specifics. One of the best lines I've ever heard, which honestly has helped me so much in my productivity and personal and professional situations, comes from Switch, this book about change leadership, written by Chip and Dan Heath. They provided the mantra, soon is not a time, some is not a number. Basically, what that means is stop and define every element in the plan so it can be measurable and held to account. And last, make sure it's correct. Don't undermine your professional credibility by neglecting grammar and spelling or including inaccurate information, obviously. If there was ever a time to triple spell check with all of our tools and then print a copy of your document to read carefully, give a copy to someone else to mark potential issues, and then spell check again and then reread again, your high stakes proposal is it for sure. I find that reading it backwards, so starting at the end and looking at the sentences starting with the periods, makes me actually pay attention to every word that's on the page. When we read and reread our work in order, it's easier to miss mistakes because our brains know what we meant to say and usually just fills in the correct thing. But printing it out to a new format or reading it backwards sort of forces our brains to stop and refocus on what's actually in front of them instead of filling in what they wanted to see. So we write our persuasive proposals by focusing on solutions, clarity, and evidence. Even if a formal proposal isn't necessary for the situation, like in a lot of school projects or personal projects, the practice of figuring out your plan and writing it down somewhere increases the likelihood that you will finish it successfully and with higher quality. Plans are good. We love plans. Proposals are really just super detailed plans. Now, if you need a little break, take 90 seconds to refocus, and then we're going to talk about personal correspondence. Personal correspondence. Once your proposal is all done and approved, you will need to stay in touch with all the people involved. We do that with personal correspondence documents, so emails, memos, and letters. The confusing thing that comes with our email, memo, letter situation is that they can be both the document itself or they can be the medium to deliver other types of content. An email can be just an email, or it can be the way I deliver my memo. A memo can be a memo, or it could be the container for my progress report. As a document form and package, emails, memos, and letters share common structural elements. So first, you're going to have a letterhead or the contact information of the company. Basically, this is when you see, a logo and all the official elements at the top or sometimes the bottom of a page. Then you have what is called the attention line. Just think of that as the to line, basically who needs to pay attention to this document. Then we have some sort of subject or headline for the overall topic. In your email platform, you have a form field to actually type in. For letters and memos, it can go after all the addressee information. The subject line makes it easier to store, search, and reference that document. If you are using the email, memo, or letter as a cover document or a delivery indicator for another document, we also like to include an enclosure statement. That is kind of a holdover tradition from when we are faxing things around. I never experienced that, but I hear and understand that things would sometimes get shuffled or not transmitted after the first page. Of course, today with our digital files, we see the attachment note right in the email platform and the page count in Adobe Reader when we open a packet, so it's not as big of a deal. Still, it's a good thing to safeguard and just write enclosure budget spreadsheet for Q3 in your email, memo, or letter to be direct and let people know that there is more content to expect. Now, content structure-wise, all three follow a narrative sequence, just meaning each section really builds on the prior. We still allow and low-key expect the audience to skip and scan around, but the intention is to start with the context situation to set up the body details and then end with the conclusion or summary of everything. You can use headings, bullet lists, and all of our other skip, scan, skim features of design. It is less common to include visuals in these documents, but it can happen if the situation needs it. Let's talk about why each specific personal correspondence exists with an example. So, emails first. If I'm writing an email and treating it as a genre, it's almost always going to be a much smaller audience, a one-to-few or one-to-one situation. We place the direct recipients in the to line that indicates you expect a response or that the person takes action on the info. We can place other readers in the CC line, which means courtesy copy, and basically we don't expect a response or action from that person. They just need the FYI, basically. Be really sure that somebody needs to be on your CC so you aren't clogging their inbox. And if you're sending an email to a lot of people and you don't really have an expectation for them to reply, you're actually probably using email as the delivery method for some other genre, like a newsletter or an announcement. A great example of this from our class. When I email you directly, let's say your project file isn't opening for me, I expect a reply and action from you. Only your email address is in the to line and I'm using email as the message. But when I post an announcement to Canvas, which does trigger an email to the whole class, I don't expect any responses. In that case, the email is a secondary delivery system for the announcement. With email formatting, your letterhead is built into the email platform with your email, the recipient's email, and the date. And then you have your subject line. Give them the big picture, draw attention to any actions or expectations, and let them know the content. Anything more than 8-ish words will probably be cut off depending on the recipient's screen size that they're checking their email on. So for example, if you're sending out an email about the upcoming budget meeting to your team, an annoying subject line that I would receive would be reminder and some notes about details about the meeting on Friday, because it front loads the vague subject, which would cause the important bit about the meeting on Friday to get cut off in my notification, and it doesn't really tell me what this is about apart from a reminder. Do you want me to read your notes? Is this just an FYI? Why are you sending this to me? A better version would be Q3 budget meeting, review proposals by Friday, because it tells them, the meeting up front. So my notification actually shows Q3 budget meeting and a hint of what the documents included and what your request actually is. This also includes some key search terms for my scanning and filtering, Q3 budget proposals. Side note, you can attach documents like the proposals in this example directly to the calendar invitation, which removes the need for the email in the first place, and it creates a linked connection across all the events. However, I have found most people don't realize or they simply forget that attachments are in the invite. Even though it is redundant and kind of annoying, it can be a better path to email anything in preparation for a meeting, depending on the culture and behavior of your team. Now, for the body of the email, start with who you're addressing it to with any variation of hi, hello. I tend to avoid time-based greetings because people will read your emails at different points, depending on their own schedules. Don't overthink this, just say hello, name. Then give them the content. Generally try to max out at 500 words because anything more than that becomes visually difficult to read with all the surrounding stuff on the email platform. Also, many people use their phones to check email, and the width resizing quickly becomes a long scroll. If you have more than a few hundred words or, a few thick paragraphs basically, then consider writing the information in a document to deliver via email. When we open a PDF or whatever, the reading experience is better optimized for that lengthy content. Even on mobile devices and small screens, it's a better read. So let's talk about email as the delivery system real quick. This is getting a little bit easier and less confusing, I think, because we are now using things like OneDrive or Google Drive to directly share files. So we don't have to really send and attach it in an email anymore. Instead, just publish and share the link directly to the people or send the link over on a system like Teams, Slack. If you need to use email, then follow the same practices for the subject line and write just 1 to 3 sentences that explain you've enclosed or attached the document and any action steps you need them to complete. Make sure that they can't open the attachment, so be mindful of any programs like sending a .pages to a non-Apple or Mac user, and the editing permissions on a document appropriate to that audience. If you need them to collaborate and make comments or edits, then you need to make sure to send the shared cloud version and not attach a copy versions. Sending them a copy, or if they download and save their own copy, means that you will have completely separate file versions. On both Google and Microsoft systems, you adjust the editing and view settings when you generate that share link or attach that cloud file. I'm going to describe a real-world example email that I received just to discuss a few other elements here. So the subject line reads, "What is your computer model and serial number? Other gear we bought." It begins with, "Hi Haley," because it's a personal correspondence to me and me alone. The opening sentence states, "I'm doing my annual computer inventory and I don't have your gear listed on the sheet I have to submit to the powers that be." The big topic is the computer inventory, stated in the first clause of that sentence. In this case, the purpose statement is actually implied. The author doesn't actually say, and this email requests that information from you or anything like that. And for emails, that definitely happens more and is okay because they are typically so short and direct. I do really want you, as you're learning and practicing, to really focus on writing explicit purpose statements as a best practice. But in this case, the orientation is, hey, this is about the annual computer inventory and I'm missing some information. And then the purpose I understood is basically, I'm writing this to ask you for the info. After that, they have the actual information in other contexts. It lists out the 3 specific questions I need to answer when I reply. The whole thing is only about 100 words broken into 3 distinct paragraphs or sections: the intro, the questions, and a concluding thought. Then they sign off with a piece and their name. Now, sign-offs are personal to you. I like to go with vibes. The common professional ones, though, don't overthink it, are thanks, best, and regards. They work for all messages, no matter your familiarity with the audience, unlike a sincerely, truly, and yours, which have a bit more personal connotation and edge to them. You can search for all sorts of memes and Reddit threads on what your signature means about you as a joke, but also not a joke, and make your decision from there. But whatever you choose, keep it to 1 to 2 words and then have your name or initials. In emails, we also have a signature line that typically includes your position, role, company, organization, alternative contact info like a chat handle or phone number. You can also customize it with logos, banners, personal links, your pronouns, and name pronunciation keys as well. Now, in a different, longer example, I received a one-to-many email message, unlike the one-to-one before. It follows the same structure, just with more content and instructions. The subject line reads, "Please complete Spring No-Show Progress Survey." It tells me right away what content and actions are required, which also makes it easy to search in my inbox with keywords like the progress survey. And then 200-ish word email is broken into paragraph 1, orientation to the academic progress reports, with the statement that we are using Starfish to make reporting as easy and efficient as possible. And the implication is this email explains that process and your action steps. They have a call to action for me with the deadline and then a bulleted list of the courses I needed to complete this action on. Next, they use italics and bolding to draw my eye to the help resources and how to complete the requested actions. They end up with a final tip. There's no formal sign-off or signature here because this email is generated by a department on a campus-wide scale instead of kind of a true one-to-one personal correspondence. Memos. Memos are the older version of an email in many ways, but they stay as a core of business, professional, and technical writing because we can contain a lot of information in such a nice skip, scan, skim package that holds some formality and is easy to reference. The main reason that memos are written in word processors, so you actually draft it in Docs, Word, whatever, and then send it out as attachments for folks to open, save, archive, and organize in their own folders. They're also designed for printing and maybe posting in your copy room or whatever. When you draft your memo in your blank document, include the following features. List the names of the people receiving the information. Usually a memo is going to be a range of people, so you can list them alphabetically or by rank. And typically include everyone's job titles. Unless your company specifies otherwise, sometimes they have standards. The memo might also be to a whole department, so you would just list the department name in the attention line. After all the attention, that to from stuff, include the date. Consider writing out the whole month instead of just the numeral format as well, just to account for multicultural companies and reduce just the overall potential for confusion. Everything else is similar to an email. The subject line is the specific topic. Make sure people can scan the header and know what the memo is about. The content should start with the orientation and purpose, deliver however many paragraphs or even pages of information you need, and close with the action items in a summary. Memos often use headings, tables, and visuals, all the design stuff of any other dense technical document. As an example, every semester I receive a faculty and staff memo from the Office of the Registrar with the purpose statement, "The Office of the Registrar would like to remind you of some important policies and deadlines." The then 5-ish, usually page memo goes on to list significant changes, key policies, and a table for registration-related timelines. They have information on dropping courses, links, and more. They use a lot of color, bolding, and bullet points under each big heading, so it's easy for me to scan for the information. It's honestly a helpful reference that I save to my desktop for easy access. Often it's actually faster for me to pull up the memo than it is to search the website or try to Google that information. It's just an all-around better experience for that campsite: context, audience, message, product. Last are letters. These are considered the most kind of formal, respectful, professional, personal correspondence and are used in really specific situations. Usually they are for external audiences, but they don't have to be. We see them for internal things that require a high level of respect and formality. So I've needed to write cover letters for job applications. This practice is more common at higher level roles, but varies by industry. For job offers to the interns that I hired, and you should expect to receive an offer letter for your careers that you're preparing for. And as a really niche situation with research submissions as a grad student and faculty member. So I needed to submit a revision letter, for example, to a journal publication editor explaining how I address the requested changes from the reviewers. Now that last situation is certainly less common to maybe most of you listening, but for those of you interested in considering graduate school at all, that is the environment I've personally written the most amount of letters actually. But I and you should expect to receive letters with all of your adulting type documents. Insurance companies send out a letter about coverage. The bank sends letters about mortgage details. Credit card companies send letters about terms and promos, that sort of thing. So it still has been helpful for me to understand how to write a formal letter because it makes it easier for me to read these super formal, often very important letters I receive. So what's the deal with letters? Use or look for, like if you received it, the official company letterhead. It usually has their logo, very high res and crisp, and then all the attention information, their full address and your name and address. If anything looks suspicious, just note it and consider double checking through a trusted channel with that company, especially if this letter is requesting sensitive information, indicates that you need to pay them, or tells you to go to any websites to complete actions. Just make sure it all checks out first. Then subject lines are optional in a letter, but certainly can be helpful. The letter includes a salutation, the greeting, usually followed by a colon instead of a comma. Those are the two vertical dots that are on the shift semicolon key. But that isn't necessarily a hard rule that's always followed. Then you give them the content, same basic structure of orientation, purpose, detail, summary. If you have a second page, restate the subject and date in the header information, and end with a signature block. Usually you see a sincerely here, and your name and title. Leave space for the e-signature or your physical signature between your close and your printed name. We have 4 big types of letters in the professional space. We have letters for documents, so a letter of transmittal for a formal report or a cover letter for a job application that highlight the content of a larger document or the stuff in your packet. These are the ones I've personally needed to write, a bit often. We have inquiry letters to get information about goods, services, and opportunities. Claim letters that are basically polite and formal complaints over goods and services, which get responded to with an adjustment letter from the company. And offer letters for job candidates that detail your salary, start date, benefits, next steps, just any other details of the new job. Offer letters can double as a contract too. So the candidate, the hiring managers, the supervisors are signing it as an agreement. So if you negotiate for anything when getting a job, from moving expenses to specific salaries to a delayed start date, you need to ensure that it makes it into your offer letter before you sign anything. Letters are often sent electronically, so through email, direct share, or application portals, and are printed and mailed too. If you ever have to write one, just go as formal, polite, respectful, and professional as possible. Instead of, hey, I want this job because I'll be good at it and I have the qualifications you listed, you might adjust your tone and language to say, I'm eager to contribute my skills and perspective to this position as my experiences align with the requirements outlined in your job posting. This is where our AI interns can be really helpful in revising your tone, grammar, and spelling for ideas just on how to turn that more casual language into its formal versions. But the interns can also create overly complicated prose. So the choice and arrangement of the words that don't sound that natural or even make sense, use them as a starting point for your more formal writing and then edit it to actually read in your voice and make sense for you. All right, that was emails, memos, and letters. We have one more subsection of common genres for project management to go over. Then we will take a break and end with section 3 on the specialized project and workplace docs. Progress reports. As you continue through your project, you may need to update people on the progress. Your progress report might show up as an email sent to your specific boss more regularly, a memo sent to the larger team on a longer timeline, or as a standalone full report sent out to clients and formal stakeholders. So no matter how you are delivering your progress report, there are 4 big things you need to keep in mind. First, introduce the scope and the purpose. Just like all of them, provide a refresh on a background on the project and where in the overarching timeline this progress report exists. Is this the initial report? How long has it been since the last one? And how many months of work will this update cover? That kind of thing. If it's a quick progress status update to just your supervisor as an email or chat, that might be just one sentence of the background because they're probably super in the loop with what you're working on. If it's a standalone report to people who are investing millions of dollars into this project, your introduction, scope, and summary sections are probably going to be much longer, maybe a couple pages, as the scope of the project's probably bigger and the readers need to catch up on those details. That's why they're reading your report, to check back in on all the details. Then you always need to make sure that you outline the status of the work and actually give them the progress. And it might be a couple of bullet points if it's just going to your teammates or your supervisor, or it might need to be a much more in-depth, really broken down, with graphs and a calendar type of section. You might make a Gantt chart, which is basically a time frame of the project displayed out with typically horizontal bars. Usually the x-axis is the weeks and the y-axis reflects the tasks or stages. They are really great at visualizing how your tasks overlap and the sequence and dependencies in this big picture timeline view. But a Gantt chart can be super annoying to make from scratch inside of Word or Docs, even in Excel, so consider exporting it from a project management tool that has templates and schedule builders built in for you. Jira is a pretty big one across technical spaces, but there are loads on the market with free plans that can do it. Microsoft has a light project manager, planner, and projects that you might play around with as students. Then you also need to talk about the budget, since it costs time and money to do these projects. So give them the situation, the money situation, and maybe how many hours you've put into it, since hours do translate to things like billing in that budget. If you need to acquire more resources or other significant updates, now would be the time to share it. And then you'll end with any conclusions, requests that you need to make, whatever it takes to get the project forward, as well as potential recommendations. The heart of a progress report is, you guessed it, reporting the progress. Reporting the progress means that you discuss the work that's been completed with any notable outcomes, the work under review, and the work that's remaining. Compare the work milestones to the initial plan or proposed timeline to show how things are developing. We have a couple of options in terms of how you might want to talk and structure that content. So you could do it in more of a time-based, where you kind of say, okay, over the last month, we completed XYZ task. Next month, we're going to complete 1, 2, 3 tasks. Think of it more like a calendar view with goals. The other option is task-based, where you say task 1 happened last month and it took this long. Here's what we did. Okay, task 2, started a couple weeks ago and here's what we're doing on that. Think of this one more like a to-do list. Both include details on the actions taken and the time frame. The difference is just the time-based emphasizes the time period, and the task-based emphasizes the stage you're at. Time-based structures can be really helpful if the project has, a very hard timeline set and delivery date. Things that take place over longer periods, like a 6-month-long project, multi-year projects, they all lend themselves better, I think, to a time-based approach because you are working in these really big chunks. We'd be like, okay, over the first quarter, here's everything that we got done. Also, more agile projects, so one that focus on continuous development and iteration, even though they might not have a hard timeline necessarily, can be easily shown in a time-based structure because you discuss what you accomplished during a particular sprint or window of time. And then shorter projects might work better for a task-based approach, or if it has a lot of tasks associated with it that must be done in a clear sequence. So if your project can be finished in 8 weeks, it probably isn't as useful to talk about last week versus this week. Instead, it's more direct to discuss the tasks. We completed this task, we hit this roadblock here, but we're getting started on this next task. I find that more traditional or waterfall managed projects are easily reported in a task-based structure, as each stage and all the associated tasks in that stage provide the organization for you. Now you can and will use both, sometimes even in the same report. You might want to introduce the progress section with a big picture task-based structure to refresh readers on what are all the steps involved here, but then need to explain some of the time-based elements as subheadings or for the more detailed points. Or it could be the other way around. It really just depends on the time period, your stakeholders, and the types of tasks that you're doing. This is the end of section 2, so let's hit a quick recap. You should have notes, examples, and highlights on the process for developing and managing a project, the purpose and structure of a proposal. You should have written down a key phrase that I love to create better plans and accountability in your life as well. You should have the common structure for personal correspondence. You should have some details about emails, like what to write in the subject line, and the reasons a memo is still valuable and often easier to use in the workplace. Have notes on what to look for when you receive a letter with common situations that they might show up. And have notes on how to structure your progress reports to best show the scope, accomplishments, and needs in your project. I recommend taking a longer break here as we end section 2. If you can come back another day, do it. It's good to break up information for your brain. Now when you're ready to start, we'll get into section 3 of the lecture, that is the more specialized project management genres. Section 3, Specialized Project Management. We're starting the final section of this lecture. These are documents that are less general for all careers and situations. They're definitely a lot more specialized to circumstances and roles inside of technical fields. First is incident reports, for when shit goes down. So incident reports, accident reports, there's other names they might have, I suppose, are basically just there to describe any event that needs a record, that paper trail, usually for liability, safety, or reporting standards. The common reasons are because of an accident, or if you have damaged equipment, whether because you broke it or you just came in that morning and it was broken, or for trauma at work, HR violations, sexual harassment, discrimination, really any unsafe, hostile, toxic work environments. If anything like that happens to you, find your company or organization's incident reports and policies just to make sure that gets documented clearly. Now, most places have the form and reporting procedures established because they are so important. Honestly, red flag if the company doesn't. For almost any business, you will need to detail and write as exactly as possible a few pieces of information. First, it's things like the date and location. So usually they need to know where at work, was it the field site, in the break room, the client's office, it happened. Check the time as soon as the incident happens if you can, and try to get the minute, or at least the nearest quarter hour. Second, you'll probably have to do things like parties involved. It could be the other people, but it could also just be equipment. And then you'll also need to think about the outcome. So basically just making sure you have a really good, clear, rich description of what went down, especially if something is damaged or someone was hurt. You'll need to explain what you or they were doing when it broke, any noises the equipment was making, other external factors. Did a dust storm kick up at the site, or did an alarm go off? Elements of the environment, was it really dark, whatever. Just try to get everything down that you can. Incident reports are here to guide any investigations, identify patterns of concern, and prevent future issues. For example, if you were following the steps in your SOP when the event occurred, that could be an indication that we need to revise the user manual or adjust your station setup. And then if you did get hurt, usually workers' compensation and HR requires the incident report to be filed within a pretty short time period as that official record. As an example from UCCS, they start with who is the person filing with space for name, role, and email address. Then they ask, where it happened. So they want the building on campus and the room number or area, like was it the grilling pit at Alpine Village or whatever. Next, the form fields are for the date and the time, which they request specific month, day, year, and the 12-hour clock format, so AM/PM structure. After that, we fill in the parties involved with contact information if known. That section is not required because your incident might not have other parties, like if you caught the grill on fire or you just slipped in the shower or something. Then they get into the details. Select what type of incident, from things like injury to fire alarms to theft and damage. Your company might have one report that's specifically for, sexual harassment and discrimination things, and a whole different report that's just for equipment damage. Or it could be all in one report like this one, where we have things like property damage in the same list with options like personal injury. It just depends on your company. And then, you can just put who was contacted, police, counseling, the ambulance, etc. And we have a space for a description at the bottom. So here's where you would write out, in more of that narrative form. It's an open box. So you explain all of those details about the environment and the steps and the external context of the incident. All right, those are incident reports. Let's turn to happier situations. Briefs. A brief refers to a short summary of a longer project idea. Usually we'll send briefs to get stakeholder or a team on board with the plan. You can also think of it like a pre-proposal, because you still have to put work and effort into it, but a lot less time than doing a full proposal. Now, creative briefs are one place where we see and use them a lot for, creative projects. In PR, social media, video production, any sort of those creative fields, we really always start with a brief. You want to make sure the clients are on board with the vision, goals, and elements before you put in all the work creating your assets and such. So for the creative brief, start with the project description and the objectives. The objectives should be SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based, to ensure you actually guide the project forward. For creative briefs, we always write out the audience and persona we are targeting with the event, campaign, video, etc. So we practice that rhetorical situation, coming up with our audience statements. Who are they? What do they do? What do they want? Why do they want it? For example, The project could be an ebook launch with an objective to drive 4,500 downloads and generate new leads. The audience might be entrepreneurs, 25 to 55, college educated who are interested in outside of the box ideas for business growth. So we know the age range, some of their education, some of their interests, generally, what is their deal? Then we get into the message and tone for what and how we want to communicate with that audience. Literally write out the adjectives for the tone and provide an example. So that way everybody, your clients and your team working on the copy and graphic assets, know what the vibe will be. You also state the types of assets and deliverables needed with any inspiration, branding, mood boards, or style notes. You might put those things like approval processes and roles for everybody on the team, the budget, the timeline here as well. Then note the final distribution channels. You may have heard of a brief on competition TV shows too, like Project Runway gives the contestants a brief, which is all the details of the vibe, deliverables, and expectations that guide the creative process along the episode's theme. So a creative brief is all those things that your creative team needs to start working on the project and help the stakeholders approve what's going on. You can turn your creative briefs into your progress reports too. And so you already have all this great information that you can just rewrite into your summary section. And then you have, your different kinds of tasks already figured out because you broke down all the deliverables and product details. If you're not in a creative field, we have technical briefs for you. So technical briefs function similar to the creative brief, but are specialized for describing product prototypes, process plans, and development scenarios. A technical brief is really just a concise document summarizing the complex technical development information for decision makers, project managers, engineers, or really any other stakeholders who need to understand the key points without getting bogged down in excessive detail. It is designed to bridge the gap really between the subject matter experts and everyone else, usually. Technical briefs are more common in certain fields, a lot of government contract areas, and technical development teams. Now, the government tends to favor and release technical briefs because they have a lot of information that they need to give to the public as stakeholders. They are funded by the public after all. And briefs are a helpful resource in any complicated product or code development for the same reason creative briefs are helpful. It explains to the team everything they need in relatable, short ways to get everybody on that same page quickly. There isn't a clear or true template for what goes into your technical brief because it is so topic and field specific. But generally, your brief will follow the outcomes of any other project management genre to describe what is going on. So you'll have your introduction, provide context, background, all that background stuff, right? You'll have your technical discussion where you present the details of the project, product, or work. And you have your actions and recommendations. Summarize any key processes, outcomes, and recommendations. Technical briefs might also have a reference area where you can list resources and sources that were cited or used. So basically, a technical brief is a too long didn't read, or I didn't need to know that much information about your technical situation. It could also be a discussion of, new manufacturing process for executives. It could be for the architecture of your software application for investors, or used as a quick roadmap and reference for your devs. It could also look like an explanation of your financial models to a client. As an example, the National Park Service has a library of technical briefs on things like archaeology and civic engagement, where basically they are explaining social capital and suggest how archaeologists can contribute to that public engagement. The last type is a research brief, to inform to usually less technical audiences the key points of your research, such as the CDC's research on health, or to explain the background of your project to a stakeholder. I see technical briefs more as explaining a concept or a tool or a function of something, and a research brief is more explicitly, we did research, we did the study, here's 2 pages explaining it to you. You need to talk about the problem and purpose of your study, your procedures and data collection, and the key takeaways that you found. In many ways, we can argue that a research poster is a form of a research brief, just printed on a giant paper and hung in a conference hall instead of as a handout. For example, a research brief on equity measurement challenges and statewide scale-up disciplinary reform as a study begins with 4 bullet points explaining the purpose and problem. Then the authors provide how they measured and monitored disciplinary disproportionality with bullet points and a table of data. The second page has the What We Found heading with charts and graphs. They end with a key takeaway section that has bullet points for research conclusions and then practice and policy implications. The collaborating universities and author information is in the footer. I'm sure the full report was like 30 pages long, maybe even more. It's pretty standard research manuscript length though, but they condensed all that into just 2 pages for the research brief. And they used some really nice color and layout design to make what could be a really hard to read, full paper into something the general audience and, more importantly, policymakers working on equity challenges could understand and do something with. Usually research briefs are created after the project is complete to share the results. Creative briefs and technical briefs can be made at the start of a project and then referenced throughout the work as kind of a roadmap and guide. Research briefs are created at the end. All right, this is the end of section 3 on specialized project management. You should have notes, examples, and applications that fit your life, career, and understanding for what goes into an incident report, both property damage and workplace safety-wise, the basic outline and uses for a creative brief, the audience and uses for a technical brief, the reasons why research briefs are written after a study. Yeah, those 3 things. All right, conclusion. After all that, all that's left is the big picture summary. Please look over your notes as we review the big actions. Fill in any missing information, and you can always play this podcast back or reference the transcript book chapter. We started with the reasons why documenting our work and projects are important with some specific scenarios and reasons. You should have written those down. We need documents for that paper trail. They're here to capture, the action, summarize situations, request information, document incidences. We can also use them to give progress and status updates. Then we talked about some ethics and project management. So you should have 2 really big ethical elements about the types of bad news we tend to deliver when managing a project. Then we went through a bunch of genres and expectations for email, memo, letters, progress reports, incident reports, creative briefs, technical briefs, and research briefs. You should have details on all those elements. All right, use your note-taking and project guides to apply these concepts to our projects this semester. Return to these materials whenever you need to reference an aspect. Thanks, associates. Vibes! Credits and sourcing. Information and content in this lecture is derived from a combination of the following sources and the creator. That's me, personal experiences in education, technical environments, and professional roles. This content is licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Share Alike, so you are free and encouraged to distribute and remix any part of it in any new medium for your goals, but please ensure your creations are available under that same license so we can keep education spreading. Practical Strategies for Technical Communication, copyright 2019 by Mike Markle and Stuart A. Selber, published in and by Bedford St. Martins. Technical Writing Essentials, copyright 2019 by Susan Last, licensed under a CC BY. Cool.